Said there was a fellow went over to a friend of his house one day. Matter of fact, if I ain't mistaken, it was Brother Billy Kelly. Brother Billy Kelly dead and gone to heaven now. He was an evangelist, preached for years at the Tabernacle Baptist Church in Greenville, South Carolina, a wonderful man of God. Brother Kelly was over at a man's house one day, and he noticed that the man, they were sitting on the front porch, and the man's little son, 12, 13 years old, he was out there in the yard with this dog. And son, he was playing with that dog, and that dog was playing with him, and he just never seen an affection and a love between a boy and a dog like that boy and that dog had. Brother Gary, he said, man, I'm telling you what, I've watched, he said, I don't mean to interrupt our conversation, but I've watched that boy and that dog, and they're like, they tight. Everywhere the boy goes, the dog goes. And that dog's just right on top of him. He said, man, that's a bond and a half. And the daddy looked at him, and he said, you want to know why that dog loves my son so much? I'll tell you why that dog loves my son so much. He said, there was a day, our septic tank's out back. He said, and it stopped up, clogged up, messed up, something's wrong. We was having to get it pumped out. He said, and we had the lids off that septic tank. Man, it was just full of nastiness. We had dug it up, and it's down in the ground down there, and we had the lids off. He said, we had left it for a minute, and we went inside to get a cool drink. He said, about that time, we heard a little old dog just yapping. Just barking its head off. I thought, what in the world is that? We don't even got a dog. Said we walked out back and we kept looking for where it was coming from, and it would yap for a minute, and then the yap would stop and start up again. He said we walked over back to our job at the hole, and we looked down in there, and down in that septic tank was this little old feist dog. He said it must have just been a stray, happened up and just fell off in the hole, and down in the septic tank it went. He said, and that dog was sitting there, and it done been treading the filth in that septic tank for a minute or two, and said it would come up, and then tread, and down it'd go, and then pop back up. And he said, my son looked at him and looked at me and said, Daddy, we can't let him die. Daddy, we got to get that dog out. He said, I looked at my boy, Brother Mark, he said, son, I ain't getting down in that septic tank with that dog. He said, son, just listen, go on in the house. We'll take care of it. Brother Doug, he said, go on in the house. This is what we'll do. We'll just let the dog, he'll tuck her out, he'll drown. We'll get it pumped out, and he'll be pumped out with it. Just don't even know who this dog is. He said, preacher, my boy had big old tears pop up in his eyes, Brother J.C. He looked at me and said, Daddy, we can't let him die. He said, son, I'm not getting in that septic tank after him. He said, I'll tell you what. If you want him bad enough, I'll lower my ladder down in there, and you can crawl down in there and get him. He said, I went and got my ladder, preacher. I lowered that ladder down off in that hole into that filth. He said, my son got on that ladder and crawled down in there. He said, my son landed in that septic tank, got up here neck deep, and when he started reaching out for the dog snapped at him. He thought he was in there to hurt him. He reached out again, the dog snapped at him. He said, my son wouldn't leave him, though, even though he'd snapped at him. He said, finally, my son reached in there, reached underneath and grabbed one of his little paws and pulled him in and held him up tight, and that dog just a quivering, just a shaking. He said he crawled up out of there. When he got out, he took that water hose. He washed off that dog. He said, and preacher, from that day till this, that dog won't leave my son. That dog will fight you over my son. He said, everywhere my son goes, that dog goes. He said, that dog loves my boy. You say, what in the world's all this shouting about this morning? What in the world's all this about? That was us. That was us. I was down in the filth of my sin. And Jesus looked down and said he loved me and he wanted me. And the Father said, son, if you want